we are here to have some discussion on the RFQ for engineering. Let me turn that over to you all to tell us where we are.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So pursuant to the request of the BOCC a while back, Public Works and Legal Counsel set out to develop a solicitation process under the RFQ requirements for design professionals and engineering services outlined in Idaho Code 67-2320. In order to effectuate that process, there's a number of components that need to be effectuated. First, the public entity has to publish notice of its intent to solicit statements of qualifications from verified individuals that have the requisite experience, qualifications, and credentials otherwise to provide certain design, professional, and engineering services for a public entity. That notice has to be published 2 consecutive weeks. The second publication no sooner than a week before the closure. Obviously, there also needs to be time in there for a few other procedures to take place. First, we've got to allow for a period for interested applicants or firms to submit questions to the public entity that they may have regarding the RFQ. And based on those questions, sometimes it may change the structure, guidelines, or instructions for the RFQ. So what we have to actually do is have kind of a staggered approach where we publish notice of our intent to solicit statements of qualifications. Then we have to have a period for questions to be submitted. Then there has to be a short period on the back end to determine if those questions are going to change how we structure the RFQ. Then we've actually got the submission deadline. Then we've got a deadline for selection where we're actually going to rank those applicants based upon their qualifications and create tiered ranking list. And then ultimately there's an appointment by the governing board actually assigning those lists. And then on the back end of that, there's going to be the extension of a master service agreement or general contract for services to each of those selected entities. So it's a pretty in-depth and detailed process. I know Public Works and my office has spent a good deal of time coming up with what is now in front of you, and it consists of 4 parts. The first page, which is page 1 of 1, is simply the notice for the RFQ. You'll see on the notice up at the heading, there's going to be the qualifications deadline for submission, which we have set as July 21st. The summary below provides a general outline of the county's intent in publishing this notice. There's a reference to specific information in the deadline for submission of questions, i.e. the Q&A period. And then ultimately there's the authorization of the governing board indicating its agreement with moving forward with this process. The next document you'll find in your packet is a general information sheet and instructions. It consists of 3 pages. It outlines things ranging from terms and conditions, method and manner of communications, which you will note there are 2 different avenues to communicate regarding which area of the project you are inquiring about. General inquiries and questions, as well as communications back to respondents, will, as I've proposed, be conducted through the Public Works Director. Information related to the actual award notices or any addendums to the RFQ that may be a result of questions submitted or otherwise will be placed on the county's website. There is an administrative information section which starts at the bottom and runs through a good majority of page 2. That just outlines some general provisions and guidelines for the project, identifies how many respondents we intend on placing in each category. That number of 3 is the highest cap number that's allowed under Idaho Code. And then it outlines the selection process, giving a reference to the next document for more detail on the selection criteria. Lastly, there's some admonitions regarding giving up of rights to the work product that's submitted, the fact that anything submitted becomes a public record. And then lastly, on page 3, there are some submittal requirements outlined there in the proposed schedule that I've come up with based upon a need and necessity to push this thing forward as quickly as we can, but still fall within the guidelines and scope of the BOCC's regular meeting schedule and publication requirements. Lastly, the non-discrimination clause at the bottom of page 3 is required for any of our notices.
Can I just ask before you move forward on that, off that page, the August 8th master agreements extended? What is that's where we have selected and now we offer an agreement?
Sure. So on August 1st is where the Public Works Director, as I've outlined the process, will bring the ranked list before the BOCC and propose that you adopt those lists based upon a ranking that her and her evaluation committee assigns to those respondents. I know it's a tight turnaround, but that gives us roughly 1 week to actually send out the master agreements to those respective firms. My hope is that Public Works can get a head start on it and be working on the master agreements ahead of time. So it won't necessarily be just a 1 week turnaround. In fact, they could start tomorrow on working on the master agreements if they would like. Obviously, my office will volunteer our time to be a part of the process and assist in whatever way we are needed.
I think the apostrophe S made me misread what you were saying there. Okay, master agreements extended. Okay.
That's probably a typo.
Yeah.
Good catch.
I was just trying to figure out what the possessive was there. So, okay.
Funny, after you proofread it 4 times, you still miss things. The next document in your packets is going to be the specifics and scope of work. Here, what we've done is we've created 3 categories for professional services. That is, we've taken a broad approach to identifying what types of services the county may need in the category of design professional and engineering services. And we've attempted to kind of narrow those down into 3 broad categories. The first being a surveying category, the second being a general engineering category, and the third being a general planning category. You'll note there are a number of functions or tasks listed in each category. That's not an exhaustive list, and the heading alludes to the fact that it may also include like or similar services to those that are actually outlined within the category itself. You'll note a few tasks that are of frequent request for the county. Under the surveying category, we often have requests to review right-of-way documents, easements, and mapping, as well as conducting surveying activities. Under the second category for our general engineering services, you'll see we've included things that are common for our public works and our roads department to encounter, as well as the necessity for the respondent to verify that they have experience or are capable of doing things such as fee rate schedule studies. The last category are planning services. Although this comes up less frequently, this is something that's oftentimes in the wheelhouse of your planning and zoning administration. So as part of the process of putting these packets together, we wrote in the planning and zoning department for input to ensure we've accounted for their needs and desires for that category. On the next page, you'll see a brief outline of the guidelines. And on page 3, you're going to see where the actual requirements for the statements of qualifications begin. There's going to be a number of things that prospective respondents need to submit. There's going to be the requirement first that they submit a statement of qualifications cover page. They're next going to have to produce a 2-page maximum letter of interest or introduction to their firm. And then lastly, they're going to have to outline or evidence their ability to perform the services as determined by the number of categories I've outlined below. First, under category A, those relevant services or functions are going to apply to the general engineering services RFQ and the general planning services RFQ. You'll see where we've also apportioned per Idaho code requirements the weight that we're going to provide to each of those categories. On page 4, under B, you're going to see the requirements for the land surveying category. You'll note as you go through these documents that the RFQ is structured in such a way that prospective applicants have to submit 3 separate applications if they intend on being considered for all 3 categories. In other words, we're saving cost on behalf of the county by publishing this all in one notice and all in one packet. But the reality of it is, as we receive those responses back, we'll be separating them out into 3 separate RFQs and generating 3 separate lists. Okay. The last page in your packet is going to be a statement of qualifications page. I was just recently making some last and final changes on it. So the finished copy, assuming that this gets adopted, will be produced in large part identical to what you see reflected there on your last page. One thing that was still left to determine, and we hadn't had a chance to verify this, is whether or not previous RFQs that have been submitted through the county have been assigned a specific RFQ number. If so, you'll see in the 3 categories there in that first table, I've given them a preliminary RFQ number. If we haven't utilized that process, I'll make that change to remove that from those category headings. So there's some slight modifications that still might be made to the SOQ cover page, depending on the input that I received from the board. Questions, comments, concerns?
Have we had lots of other counties lining up to get a copy of this as a master model of what it should look like?
You know, it's one of those things where there's not really a one size fits all. So I've drafted RFQs for other public entities before. I've done them for water districts, cities, etc. And really every public entity can have their own unique desires for what they want services for. Mm-hmm. Additionally, depending on how many firms or operators you have in your area may dictate how specific you can get with those categories. For instance, if you take Ada County as an example, they have 17 different categories just for engineering services. So they have 17 different lists with 3 firms on each list, totaling 50 something firms. Sure, there you go. There's a teacher coming out. I like it. So obviously we're not in a jurisdiction where that would be fruitful for us, right? If we sent out an RFQ for 17 different categories, we probably would have a lot of those categories come back unresponded. Mm-hmm. And so it benefits us, I think, in a rural jurisdiction to try to consolidate those categories, be a little broader, mm-hmm. In hopes that maybe we solicit more applications.
I'm impressed with the depth of the work. Congratulations to both of you for what looks to me to be a very competent document. I think we're on the right steps to getting things done properly.
I would agree.
Other questions or comments or just general flattering statements from the board?
It's impressive. The RFQ numbers, if they weren't utilized in the past, would it be advantageous to start doing that?
It might help you guys to track and identify them. But at the same time, sometimes I don't want to change a procedure. If we've already got a way that we're documenting or tracking things, then I don't want to change it on you guys arbitrarily without knowing how you kept your records.
So I kind of like the way that is because it gives the year so that we only have 5 years. So it kind of gives you a heads up that, hey, this is getting old, so we better.
And I forget which jurisdiction did we steal that from? Was it Meridian?
Meridian.
Use that format. Yeah, so Meridian used that format, and I think it can be beneficial for tracking in the future.
Yeah.
I like the show co. I might get license plates. Show co. That beats RFQ.
A last point for consideration before the board takes action to consider approve this by default, as with many obligations, the authority to undertake this process lies within the governing board. From there, if the governing board wants to delegate it out, it needs to make a specific motion that it doesn't intend to assume this responsibility for themselves and to in fact delegate that task. With that said, if the board wishes to assume this responsibility for yourself, I will need to make a number of changes to the documents, but I would be happy to do so. If the board wishes to delegate the task to a department head, such as your public works director, as I've set up the documents for already, that will need to be part of your motion, the delegation of the RFQ process and initial selection to propose the final list to the BOCC.
I don't see any reason we shouldn't saddle Jessica with this grave responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the work you put into it, I think you're gonna.
You
Present
understand
what we
it,
need.
right?
I understand it.
You,
Yeah.
you helped build it. You should
Ben
have
and I
the best
built
understanding.
it, so,
And you're gonna be help choose the applicants, and
yes,
you understand that process as well, and
And
what
you're
they're
gonna have to
needed
work
for.
with them.
correct.
So inform him.
The way the selection criteria is outlined within the information and the specifics and scope of work contemplates the public works director, if she in fact is delegated with the task of overseeing this process, has the discretion to appoint an evaluation committee that she can bring in and review the applications together as a group. So that gives her the ability to reach out and rope in, whoever she thinks might have applicable knowledge to analyze the statements of qualifications and rank the firms.
Okay.
All right. Commission, are we ready to act?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion that we accept this RFQ, the entire process is outlined here, and that we delegate our public works director to oversee the process. Would that be a satisfactory motion? That do that?
okay, so move.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
No.
Other than to say thank you for helping the
Yes,
county
very nice.
do this correctly. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. You are now delegated
Thank you.
with yet more tasking. All right. Thank you.
If you need anything else from me on it, let me know. Otherwise, I will send you the final drafts of everything. And then we'll need to get it to the news press by tomorrow, so it can be published on the timeline for next Tuesday.
Okay.
Sound good?
All right. This meeting is adjourned.